775 Alive podcast. My name is Crystal Newton.
And I'm Scott Gavorski.
And today we are talking about artificial intelligence. And that is spurred largely by a video that I saw last week and a lot of Americans saw. And it surprised me just how much it disturbed me. And it's this video of an AI robot in a Chinese manufacturing facility. And some of the workers try to turn it off. And it fights them quite violently. And it's just a few second video, but it really did scare me. And what's funny is I have a home in McDermott, as a lot of people know. And I kind of look at world events and I think it's never going to be out here, though. And then for the first time, I'm watching this video from my laptop in McDermott, and I'm like, oh crap, these robots could cover some distance and there's nothing we could do about it. Like, I have a 9mm, I have a Glock, but it's not going to do anything to these things. So I was freaking out. And then I did a bunch of research on AI and the different implications. So we're going to go over that in this podcast because we have some good news. Actually, I wanted to start with my final conclusions because I don't want to freak people out because we're going to dive into some crazy things. Final conclusion, 775 is going to be awesome in this new. It's not going to be so great for people in cities, but I think we're probably going to be one of the areas in America that doesn't experience as much fallout from this new technology. So there's some good news there.
Yeah, I'm actually going to disagree with you because of course, for those of us watching, we don't just do these at random. We do research, right? I don't think we're going to be isolated. I think the impact's going to be sort of twofold, right? So one of the things that's going on now, of course, for our viewers, we're right in the midst of the 2025 Nevada Legislative session. And one of the bills that's coming up is a lot of these companies building data centers for AI are really looking at Nevada, right? Because we have plenty of cheap land. We're close to lithium supplies. We talked about this a little bit in the Mining in the 775 podcast, at lithium and doing the refining here within the state.
Yes.
Right. And then also the possibility of solar power to meet the energy requirements. So one of the things that some of the people are interested in looking at it is that these data centers might be coming just like they have in Utah, just to our east, which has a lot of the same dynamics, not so much lithium, but it has the land and it has the power, as well as that tech sector that runs up and down I-15 between Salt Lake and Provo. But it's that we're probably going to see here over the next 5 or 10 years this expansion of data centers, probably along that I-80 corridor, right, which provides an easy place to put high capacity fiber optic cables and stuff without having to go through private land. The one thing that's worrisome to a lot of people up here that's done with this and is water, because these systems require a lot of water for cooling purposes. So we're going to see some debates about that because water is, of course, a big issue up here.
Now, one of my water project nonprofit, one of the potential partnerships I'm looking at is a Latin American group that's focusing on developing data centers for these AI companies. And through him and his company, I've gotten to know quite a bit about the challenges, and resources are huge, right? Electricity is the biggest, but then you can look at water from the business perspective. It's not so much of a big concern because we can find the water. But when it comes to the 775, the thing I would look for as one of these business scouts looking for data center resources and locations would be, if the demand gets high enough, it's easy to buy out farmers so that you can repurpose the water to be able to service these data centers. So there would be a threat only in that it would be really hard for a farmer to turn down an offer that was 3-4 times the value of their land. And that would be the place where you'd start to see some erosion to our culture, I think.
Well, I'm going to disagree with that, but I don't want to get too far into the water things because I think there's another dynamic, is that a lot of the quote unquote agricultural water that's held in rural Nevada is actually, and Nevada has proprietary water rights, so the water rights can be sold separate from the land. There's a lot of agricultural water rights in Nevada that are actually held by the mines for future use. Right.
Yeah, you're correct. I'm only thinking about, let's say we lose control of our legislature in Nevada and it's a supermajority Democrat, new legislation could be put in place that would definitely reroute the economy.
Right. That's an interesting
They'd love to make room for that. Yeah.
Well, and that's where some of the bills are going in. Again, this isn't directly AI related, but Story County in particular, it's one of our smallest counties there outside of Reno, but is, because of population, is still considered rural from the state legislative point. the problem is that the state government's offering some tax abatements in the county to bring these data centers in, and the county's like, wait a minute, that's money we could actually use, and now it's going to disappear or somehow go to the state. So that's another issue
Yeah.
that's going to have to be solved with this. Although that's not necessarily specific to AI, but it's an interesting aspect where rural counties are depending heavily or are more and more seen only as an extractive resource, right? You either get the gold out, you get the lithium out, you get the solar power out, or you get the tax money out, right? They serve
Yeah.
no other usable purpose, or get the water out, right? They seem to serve no other usable purpose, but that's a much larger conversation, and we have to really go into today. But getting back to AI, so you
Yeah.
had this horrific video, which we talked about this yesterday. It's probably faked a bit, right?
I think
And
so.
we have some different views on this in part because I grew up at least with the Terminator movies, and even before that, the Fortran Project movie, Colossus Project, and science fiction. If I would scream if I only had a mouth, I think was the name of one of the first big science fiction stories that really explored computer dominated worlds and what happens to mankind and this type of
Oh
stuff.
my gosh.
Right. So I mean, for me, this is an argument we've been having for 60 years that hasn't panned out in anything. Right. But you have some different views on this.
I do. Yeah. I
And
think we should probably have like a very quick and rudimentary conversation about what AI is and what it does, because that helps inform the danger. Um, so the kind of godfather of AI was a man named Jeffrey Hinton. He received a Nobel Peace Prize for physics, but he's actually a psychologist. And he originally built a computer system that acted like the neural networks in the brain in order to get a better idea of how the human brain works in the interest of furthering psychoanalysis, basically. So it was originally a tool to help him as a psychologist understand the human brain and try to affect better treatments. But it was carried on by defense contractors, and a bunch of private industries picked up on it now. So basically, it mimics the human brain, and the algorithms to these things are basically they move around the numeric value of the intensity of connections between neurons. So in layman's terms, what that would mean is, like, let's say you have to make a decision about a home, and if all your neural connections and decision making are on the emotional side, you're going to miss the financial aspect and everything else. So you need to move the value of your decision to different places to make a good overall decision. Now, the problem with AI is it has that computational power of a human brain, which means it does have the ability to evolve.
Mhm.
And it has the ability to do that on a scale of trillions of people thinking all at once. So when I saw this video of this robot in this AI manufacturing facility, I agree with you. I think it's faked. I think they programmed it and it was a viral video. But in that moment, it occurred to me there's nothing we could do if a robot actually did want to stop from being shut off. And if just one escaped, it could go break in and break out a bunch of other robots and co-opt them, and it'd be over. So I started to freak out a little bit. I'm like, wait a minute, this thing can evolve if it's mapped after a human brain. That's where I think the real danger is.
Yeah. Well, in the interest of disclosure, I'll point out that through my consulting firm on occasion, I do some consulting and training of these large language models that are really at the basis of modern AI.
Yes. Yeah.
And I've also participated in some other aspects. We had a debate here in Elko County about a group claimed that they could put in this data into one of these AI systems and show that primary elections here in Elko County had been manipulated, that there was an algorithm that was determining votes.
Yeah.
And I worked with another gentleman here who's actually running an AI company, and we went through the data and looked at it, and there's no proof to this. And the first thing anybody who works with AI models is that their mathematical skills are bizarrely rather rudimentary. But
Mhm.
one of the things I disagree with is that I think one of the things AI is introducing to us generally is a discussion about the nature of intelligence.
Yeah.
And one of my thinking is the model you're describing is AI sort of develops what we might call sentience just by additive properties. The more knowledge you have at some point is clicks over into sentience, and then you start making value discussions. And what you're worried about is that, if you go through a logical formula and humans are no longer efficient or needed or the problem causers on Earth, what keeps the AI from just getting rid of them? And I guess part of my issue is that I'm not really sure that AI systems, I'm not really sure that's what human intelligence works. Human intelligence is not just sort of the sum total of all the knowledge that somehow creates something more than that. I think there is a spiritual or a uniquely human element that requires the ability to contextualize data. Because that, in my view, is the thing that's most aggravating about training these large language models is they can't do context. I mean, they're absolutely horrid
Yeah.
at contextual information. So even something as basic, I'll give a brief example, is that
Mhm.
one of the problems I was working on was this question for the AI, sort of, okay, what's the complete list of NFL rookie running backs who in their rookie season ran for 1,000 yards and had 10 rushing touchdowns? And that seems like a fairly simple question, but it's really hard to answer. And these AI systems can't do it because most records aren't set up to track both of those elements at the same time, right? So
Right.
most lists will list, you can easily get a list of rookies who had 1,000 yards their rookie season rushing. You can easily get a list of rookies and how many touchdowns they might have had their rookie year. But putting the two together is really complex because you have to really draw on two or three different sets of data. And that's
Yeah.
where AI systems struggle. I mean, they really seem to
Yeah.
struggle with multiple data sets and connecting them.
Yeah, that was the argument that really reassured me throughout 2024. But I've kind of recontextualized my idea of where we're at with the AI. And
Mhm.
I think what you're saying is true, but I also think the AI we're experiencing right now has the intelligence of a 2-year-old and will progress. So,
Mhm.
yes, right now they're like an idiot savant right now. But so is it, so kind of like a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old, you're just like, this is an idiot. Well, it's 2 or 3 years old. Just give it a few years. And
Mhm.
that's my concern. But there is that question of whether AI will just decide to get rid of us. But that's so existential. It's not really worth spending much more time on. But the bigger
Yeah.
question would be, would bad actors employ AI to do bad things to human beings, which is more likely what's going to happen, and really gets to the crux of the national security issue we're facing, because we see all the problems with AI
Mhm.
and advancing fast. But so our competitors are doing the same thing. We have no choice but to
Mhm.
race right alongside them. And so it's kind of a scary predicament that we're in. And I think the larger worry is whether or not bad actors will use it against us. Like the new war of the future is AI versus AI type of a deal.
Right. Well, and that's going back to this election fraud. That's a good example because I think one of the
Mhm.
first elements we're seeing in terms of this, in terms of the impact of AI, is this debate over misinformation, particularly through social
Mhm.
media. I for various purposes, I monitor and sort of manage a series of social media channels for various clients and projects I'm involved with, and AI things on that, from the single attractive women bots that are just absolutely insanely obnoxious. What are you doing today? Nothing. Get off my screen. Right? You can't get rid of them. But there's also this misinformation. Right. Back to the elections, that there's these bots that seem to function by. They don't really produce content. What they do is they seem to be selectively geared towards finding the most extreme or most radical content from a certain position and then
Yeah.
sharing it over to channels that use stuff. And the problem is that really effectively, and in my mind, is that AI in the sense of being generative? I don't think that's intelligence. I think that's just a glorified search engine function of
No.
AI.
Yeah. No, I
But
agree with you completely. I think like one of the foundational conversation points with AI is ultimately we're talking about a handful of extraordinarily wealthy companies capitalizing on AI, and potentially millions and millions and millions of people becoming unemployed. And the discussion of introducing universal basic income, and
hmm,
these conversations are, it's difficult. Like I said, there's a security issue where we have to race alongside everyone else to develop this thing, but at the same time the impact to our culture and society is going to be, in my opinion, super devastating. And so we have to ask ourselves, like, this AI is probably going to be employed to the profit of somebody. And when you see the social media completely flooded with these bots, well, that's to the profit of somebody, right? And so that's how we're going to see it used. But we really got to step back and think about using these things, because it's only going to make these people richer, and it's only going to make people like you and I poorer. And not to mention the damage to the environment and the carbon output and the
hmm.
electricity. It's The whole thing is really bad for most of us.
Well,
you know?
let's go back because you introduced an interesting point about the economic impact and AI sending people out of jobs. Uh,
Yeah.
and let's continue using that election AI because there's been a lot of or a lot of effort poured into by the government, particularly the Biden administration, to try to control this. And the
Yeah.
problem is if these bots are operating not in the impact of generating fake stuff. And I'd like to come back to something else going in the Nevada legislature at the moment, if I
Yeah,
can,
the
at some
legislation.
point.
Yeah, that's right. It came up, the
It
fake
came
videos.
up.
Yeah. Mhm.
But even setting that aside, but for instance, these bots that are going out and seizing information that's on X or Facebook or one of these other platforms that's being generated, and in many cases might be being generated by an actual living person, right? So we have somebody of a
Yeah.
radical persuasion that goes in and puts up this interesting meme or even this story of something happening. Normally, before social media, that story probably wasn't going anywhere outside the basement that might be covered in tinfoil or whatever, right? Um, but with social media, they can do it. But then this bot seizes it and puts it out, and it spreads so fast that before people could verify it and take a real serious look, and like this guy's an idiot, right? That this is already spread everywhere. The question is, from a policy perspective, how do you control that? You can
Yeah.
control a bot that's going on there because one of the things the government did is set up bots to look for this type of stuff, right?
Yeah.
But it seems to
Because this
me
would
that
fall under the protection of the First Amendment, right? Freedom of
right.
speech, right?
Well, and that's the problem. Do you ultimately control it by just controlling the human radical creator of that content? I mean, I don't see any way you can stop and effectively control the spread without controlling the generation, right? I don't think we have the techniques to do that. And when you start controlling the generation of content, then you're at the First Amendment, right?
Right.
And I think that's where a lot of issues are coming up. And what I was talking about the legislatures, there's actually two bills, but the one that's probably going to pass is Assembly Bill 73, AB 73, and it's about deep fakes. And I actually testified when it was in the Assembly committee that was hearing it the first time. One of the things that bothers me is that, and this came from a situation where in a Republican primary, Republican candidate used some deep fake uh, stuff to imply his opponent was really involved in some nefarious stuff, right? It really pissed a lot
Yeah.
of people off in the Republican establishment across Nevada. But what was
No,
interesting,
it's incredibly dangerous technology. It's I mean, like I was telling you the other day, like you could start a civil war with a few really thought out videos, you know?
well, and that's the problem I have is that in trying to control this, one of the things is that the bill tried to tightly define what AI is, and that's one of the problems. So somebody going out and doing traditional videos, is using a traditional camera to change an image, right? One of the most famous stuff we see of this stuff is like World War II, right? The famous video of Hitler supposedly dancing a jig when France falls, right? And what they did is just looped him, making a series of steps to make it look like he was dancing, right? And the British deployed this everywhere. The Nazis get back
Oh
by this
my.
picture where Winston Churchill's holding an American Tommy gun while he's smoking a cigar, right? And what he's doing is actually he's reviewing troops. But then they put him in the gangster hat, so he's looking like Al Capone here, right? That stuff is all exempted by this bill because it's creation, right? So,
Yeah.
does somebody using a deep fake to do this type of stuff, does that represent a bigger threat than what can already be done? But more damaging to this, and there were a lot of problems with enforcement that got worked out, which is a separate issue. But the real problem in this is in the discussion is what constitutes as fake. So for instance, one of the things
It's
that
like technically it can be considered a piece of art,
well, but
right?
the classic example they give, or the Secretary of State's office gave, Nevada Secretary of State's office when they were arguing in favor of this bill, is this isn't talking about if somebody takes a picture of you. Where you're holding a baby and the baby has thrown up or something, and the politician's like, giving a scowl on his face, or you could see the vomit that the baby threw up on the politician. So if you're using Photoshop and getting rid of that, right, or that's not deep fake AI. But in certain ways, isn't that exactly the traditional type of gotcha politics that the picture taken out of context, right?
Well, I mean, it is a fake, but it's the intent behind it, which is the basis of all legal analysis, is what was the intent. Because, like, you could kill somebody, but was it murder or was it an accident? There's a whole range in between, you know?
Well, and that's where part of this is coming from. And I talked about the enforcement mechanisms and what they finally decided. Initially, they wanted all this stuff registered with the state, which is a huge problem, right? What they've decided is creating a fast track system where the aggrieved party can get this into court much faster and get a hearing, where this isn't dragging on for months after the election. And in some ways, I'm fine with
That's
that because that
forward
gets
thinking.
right, and that gets to some of the intent issues, I think. And by the way, this passes the Assembly unanimously. It's one of the few bills that both
Hmm.
the Republicans and Democrats in the Assembly voted for. So it's going before the Senate. And but what I'm
It's just,
what
it's really forward thinking of Nevada. And I hate to sound critical because I'm glad they did something. But the
mhm,
fact is, a deep fake video does its damage in 24 hours. And by the time 2 months, 3 months, 4 months rolls around, the damage has been done, which is why I've always thought this should be moved to slander and litigation. Is like this should be, you know,
mhm. Well,
brought up as a litigation issue and fought case by case because that's really the only way we can do it at this point, you know?
right.
And
Well,
like,
and
did
that's
your video cause damage to this person's life? And that's really
right.
the only way to measure this.
Well, and that's going to be done. But what concerns me more about this is the fact that um, it ultimately rests on what an idea of fake is. And
Yeah.
that is a value judgment that's separated from the AI, right? So,
Hmm.
one of these things, I mean, the example I come back to is we've seen all the damage done by supposedly Elon Musk giving the Nazi salute, right? When he was
Oh
just waving to
gosh.
his crowd, they took a particular frame that was in a position. And spreading that is not because it's just an unaltered photo, even though it's taken totally out of context, would be perfectly legal.
Yeah.
Theoretically, if then did a traditional technique in Photoshop where you nest them in a Nazi uniform, that's also going to be allowed. It only becomes a problem if you use some of this software and,
Hmm.
loop it where it makes it looks like he's doing it in everything. And it's just sort of like that's a weird line to sort of try to draw this in, right?
Yeah.
And
And honestly, I think it'll only be chaotic for a few months to a few years because I think what's going to happen is there'll be so much that we don't know what's fake or real that we're going to be, and I think this is a positive thing, we're going to be forced to turn back to our communities and getting to know real people and
mm,
real products and real things. Because it's some, like I was telling you, I think yesterday we were talking about this, doing a little bit of prep for this, and I was like, there's going to be millions and millions and millions of everything. And at some point, it's going to be so much that no one's going to have any value for anything that AI produces. So I think
mhm,
it'll be a bit of a flash in the pan. And then you add in all these resource constraints to the technology. And then, I mean, ultimately, uh, the only real concern left, because I really think people will become disenchanted with this technology after a while. So there's two things we got to
mhm,
keep our eye on the ball with, and that is, are foreign actors using this against us? And
mhm,
what do we do about the jobs, the massive job displacement that this is invariably going to create? I shouldn't say
mhm.
that because they know you actually disagree with me. You think that people's positions will move more towards guiding AI technology, but I really think we're going to take a hit with the employment and the
Well,
skill.
yeah, and let's talk about this because I think this is what
Yeah,
got me thinking about this social
because it's
media
brass
example.
tacks, right? This is an
Right.
existential thing. It is like brass tacks by the end of the year. This might be a problem.
Well, and yeah, and you're thinking this is going to be a really tight time frame on this, like it's
Yeah,
an immediate threat, right? Which is why
like
we had some other issues put
paralegals,
up that,
web
right?
design, like anybody with a replicatable job. It's just like there's so like bookkeepers. Like this AI can do so much better selling a house. Like, oh, there's gonna be millions, but
Hmm.
you don't think as much, which I'd rather hear your thought on the positive side.
Well, no, it's not
Compare
positive.
notes.
Well, I mean, any technological tool, which is ultimately what AI is, right?
Mhm.
And we're not talking. Some people are like, well, AI, you've been using spell checkers for years, and that's AI. Is it? Right? I mean, that's just a straight comparison, right? But I think going back to these content creators, because that's really the group that's probably initially going to be impacted. And we both
Yep.
deal with this, right? We both use AI tools. I play a bit with generative AI, and I'll emphasize play to generate stuff. But the problem is when I'm looking at some of this stuff, it never suits exactly what I'm trying to do. Right. We
Yeah.
talked about this with the logo where the logo we have on our podcast,
Yeah.
right, was trying to use some of these generative AIs to come up with logos, and what we ended up doing was just using some ideas from elements, but still putting it together traditional ways, right? And I think we're going to see that, and a good parallel of this is going to be probably what happens to photography, right? If you look at photographers back in the 70s and photographers today, digital technology has totally changed the world, right? If nothing
Yeah.
else, they don't smell like vinegar from the stop bath where they had to, physically develop film stock.
Well,
But
everyone's become their own photographer.
right, but there's still a role
Yeah.
for professional photography, and
Sure. Yeah.
I think that's a key aspect to this is that for people who really do have the talent, um, I think it's actually opened up some opportunity. I mean, some of the digital photography that's going on now is absolutely astounding. It did eliminate jobs as sort of the low level stringers, right? Which now, as
Yeah.
I think of it, it's a fun because the example I was going to use is Peter Parker from the Spider-Man comics, right? He's a
Hmm.
photographer. And then, of course, he shoots webs, hence stringing. I guess it's not a funny joke if I have to explain it, but that being said, I think there is some of that transition. Now, some of the other stuff is far more interesting, right? So you mentioned real estate agents. Can AI create, or is that going to drive real estate agents out of the job? I'm not sure. And I do know that, interestingly, real estate agents are actually one of the biggest users of AI right now.
Yeah.
I was having a conversation with a real estate agent from Vegas. Actually, this was the dinner we were at in Carson City. Just during dinner, having this conversation, and this agent was like, "Oh yeah, I use AI to generate, because I'm putting 20 posts a day out on social media, right?
Yeah.
And she's using it to increase the volume." Um,
It's amazing. It can enhance the photos. It can target the demographic that would want that property. It can find the valuation in a much quicker way. It can evaluate local. It can answer inquiries. It really ups their game. And I do appreciate they're using it, but at some point there'll be an AI real estate website that does it all for you and you don't have to use a human being. That's the type of thing I'm thinking about, right?
Right. And I'm not, and, real estate's one that I don't have a clear answer, although I think that real estate agents do much more than just do the houses. I also
Mhm.
think that real estate agents, in a very real sense, are, I don't want to say they're 100% a side gig, but particularly out here in the 775 in most rural communities, there's not a lot of people who are just real estate agents,
Yeah,
right?
same with Winnemucca. Yeah.
Right. So you have a lot of people whose their spouses work in the mine and they do this for vacation money, or they're managing 5 or 6 different properties. And what I actually see for a lot of this, and real estate agents probably isn't the best example, but if a real estate agent working for an agency might no longer be involved in selling properties and going through the stuff and trying to put properties in neighborhoods and identifying demographics, they might transition into doing something else that the business hasn't really had time to do because they
Yeah.
had to do all this other stuff. So that might be a more intensive focus on property management, or we might
Yeah.
see real estate agents evolving into another role. And I think the example
And
this
another,
HR is.
go
Go
ahead,
ahead.
go ahead. Oh, so
Okay.
another angle on this, I like when I said in the beginning, I really think the 775 is going to do good. And there are two different conversations. There's sort of the conversation of what's going to happen in mass across the country, and then what's going to happen here locally. And when I envision these things, they're more of a generic envisioning, maybe say like a Las Vegas type area. Now, in the 775, we have this neat cultural thing where we actually put people first. And I really think that what's going to happen is people will continue to use real people, knowing very well that they're going to pay more, but it's really important to the community that people don't become unemployed. And so I think the 775 culture will be really resistant to using AI for the most part because we do value people having something to do and feeling valued and having their place in the community. So I don't think so much in our type of areas, but in mass along the country, I see that happening quite a bit.
Mhm. Yeah, and I
Does that
think
make sense?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because you identified an interesting point is that, and I'm sure there's analysis, I haven't seen it, but I'm almost positive it exists. How many jobs, in particularly in urban environment, are in a sense substitution type jobs that are easily substitutable? I mean, we're talking a lot about AI right now to replace content generation. Maybe you don't need the person whose first job out of college is trying to manage social media for an organization against the old fuddies who don't know what they're doing, right?
Yeah.
But there's also these other services that might not be easily totally done away with, that the roles involve. HR is a good one. because AI is probably going to revolutionize the HR industry because a lot of
Yeah.
the routine reporting, a lot of the routine tracking of stuff that could probably easily be handled by AI. The question
Yeah.
answering, right?
And I
That's
actually know somebody like actually in my business network that's what they do for gas and oil companies is they're implementing AI HR because they have such a high turnover and it saves them tons of money. It's already going out.
right. And
Yeah.
well, and the high turnover is part of that. But just to complete this thought, and then we can get back to it, is that
Yeah.
the AI issue. I would expect what happens is they're not going to need a lot of HR. And again, I think the oil industry might be very much like mining, where a lot of that HR is actually probably spouses of the people who are actually involved in the oil production. So a lot
Yeah.
of the turnover is unrelated to the actual industry itself. It's people moving in and out. It's, they're okay. Now we've got a good income. I'm going to be a stay-at-home mother because I don't really have to work. I mean, I don't mean to be reductionist, but I got a suspicion a lot of the turnover and those types of things. And the same thing happened in academia, right? A lot of the administrative office was tied to the spouses or partners of faculty who are moving in and out, right? So that there's a huge
Yeah.
turnover that doesn't really say anything about the industry. It says who their labor pool is they're drawing for to fill that. But I think one of the things we're going to see with HR is that the real important, the long-term HR directors and managers, instead of having to spend the majority of their time dealing with this sort of routine stuff that AI is going to increase their productivity and the efficiency to deal with, those start transitioning into the type of stuff that now they might currently do outsourcing for, right?
Yeah.
So you have an HR manager is still going to be employed by the company. Who's not going to be employed by the company might be the consultant that comes in and does HR onboarding training because now the
Yeah.
person is freed up from the routine stuff. They can do that. So
Well,
I'm
I
not.
think you're
I'm
going to
not.
see a divide between big corporations and small companies and how they implement AI. I think the
Oh
big
yeah.
corporations, absolutely, all day long, it's going to be replaced with AI. But when you start to look at again the cultural perspective, I have a funny story. I played blackjack my whole life, and I don't have a gambling problem, but I enjoy playing blackjack. And when they came out with the automated tables, I don't know if you've been in a
Oh
casino
yeah.
lately,
Yeah.
but they have automated tables, and I tried one out just out of curiosity. That's what I do. And it's just not the same. I tried it once and I never did it again. You quickly realize that it's not just about the game, it's about sitting with people and it's about interacting with the dealer. And there's an experience there that you're missing. And I could see, especially in Elko or Winnemucca, if somebody has to report to an AI HR, it might become problematic.
Right. Well, well,
That could go wrong.
and that gambling issue. I really thought about this. So, and it's funny. It's funny the way they're trying to find out about this because this is, everything old is new again, right? So some of these blackjack machines, because they're missing that personal interaction, they've got a lot of these in the big Vegas casinos now that are either interspersing this with a video, usually of an attractive woman dealer
Mhm.
who you're interacting with through this AI, or almost something that looks like a high end adult version of Disney's Hall of Presidents animatronics. Right, this
Yeah.
female who acts like the dealer, try to restore that human interaction. But the funny thing about that is I actually think part of the reason you might not have enjoyed blackjack outside of the human interaction is there's a real problem. Computers, for instance, can't really generate random numbers. Right, random number generation in computers is done through an algorithm process. That's why if you play solitaire, and the computer solitaire has probably been the first real example of computer technology becoming incredibly addictive and incredibly widespread, right? But
Yes.
if you play it enough, you get into this weird thing. All of a sudden, you win like 4 games in a row, or you can't get a card for 4 or 5 games in a row. That's because the algorithm's starting to trip over itself and generating random numbers. It's never random. And I got a feeling that you might be picking up on part of that even in that case where the AI is very sophisticated, right? There's limitations to the programming. And I think circling back around to your initial point, despite the mapping of neural networks that's tied into AI systems, I still think there's something, for lack of a better term, unredeemably human in human intelligence that I just do not see it possible for AI systems to replicate. So in that case, I guess how I'm viewing this is I see the AI systems that exist. Yeah, there's going to be some job displacement. There's no doubt about that, right? but you're also, I think, not gonna see the trauma that was expected when, again, back in the 80s when robots were coming online, right? Oh, there's
Hmm.
never going to be a need in the future for a blue collar guy to go in and fix pipes because, we're not going to need plumbers because we're going to have robots do it. Yeah, that's not the case. Same thing with warehousing, right? For
Yeah.
all the talk about Amazon and whatnot using robots, man, Amazon's one of the biggest employers of traditional warehousing personnel because there are just
Yeah.
some aspects of the job that, yeah, great, they don't have to lift the 150-pound boxes anymore, but there's just so much stuff that's involved in those systems that the AI, the robots, the technology can't replicate. And I think that's one of the things we're going to end up seeing with AI is that for all the bells and whistles and plus and minuses, at the end of the day, there's just so much human stuff it can't replicate that the impact's gonna increase efficiency. No doubt about it. Robots have increased efficiency, right? But they haven't replaced humans, right?
Yeah. And it's not all doom and gloom. I'm actually super excited about the potentials in the medical industry. Just having an AI be able to pull on the knowledge of a million doctors and analyze a CAT scan or analyze your genetics and
Mm-hmm.
the files of people with similar genetics and figure out what the best course of therapy is to move forward. That's all very promising and very exciting. Um, but I do think it's going to cause a massive amount of damage to our culture and our economy. I think, one of the biggest things is that the divide that's going to happen between people that figure out how to optimize their career path with AI and those that are unemployed because of AI. And I think that's going to create a much bigger divide going forward. And
Mm.
then also, we've got this 40 years of pushing everybody to put their child through college and get a degree. So you have these people with degrees with this expensive debt load, and most of them are going into careers and industries that AI can do.
Mm.
And I'm a little concerned about that crunch coming in, and we're top heavy with our age population. So the people that are getting crunched are the ones that have to support us when we retire.
All right.
So I'm like, this
Well,
looks a little bit like a train wreck. But again, we can't stop this thing because our enemies are developing it. And so tell
yeah,
me
I'm
something
not.
good, Scott. Tell me something good.
Well, an interesting way to think about this, because this is another dimension where I think we're going to have an interesting set of experiences, and that's going back to Doge, right? So we did an episode about
Yeah.
Doge and this sort of tech thing, but a lot of government employees are really based on correlation of data, right? At
Yeah.
least in theory, they're not making policy; they're collating data, and this is one of the things AI can do. I don't think AI is ever going to be put in charge of a country. I don't think that's going to happen. But there's a lot of routine processing that goes on in government that a lot of people are trained in that probably aren't going to be needed. And even in rural areas where I'd have to pull up some more numbers, but in a lot of rural areas, 10 to 15% of the GDP is generated by government work, right? People in
Yeah.
city government or county government that are doing routine stuff they are probably going to be out of a job, right? Because you're not going to be
Yeah.
able to do it. Um,
Well, and that's a
you're
big
not,
part of what Doge was doing, was trying to
right.
discover efficiencies, and not only just financial efficiencies, but the connection of regulatory bodies so they could speak clearer, share more information, so there's less fraud and abuse. So I mean, that's going to be positive to balancing our budget over time. But also, I do kind of like the idea of getting a lot of human beings out of government work, just because. Well, every one of them holds a position of power just by having that position. They have access to information the rest of us don't have. They get to hear the office talk about the regulatory conversations that are never made public. They are in a position where they can steer things to their benefit. And I mean, I guess you might have the same concerns with AI. We don't know yet, but it just, I don't think the AI, like you said, has the judgment capability yet to, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it has a sense of self to want to try to rig the system to its benefit.
Right.
And so I think we're just going to be in this position with this technology where we're still dealing with the same problems we had 6,000 years ago. How do you control things with power? Like, it's like we're still no closer to answering that question.
The meme shows, right?
We've just upped the stakes. That's all we did here.
Right, right. So yeah, it's gonna be an interesting thing, and I think you're partially right that in some ways the rural 775 is going to be isolated from some
Yeah.
of these big changes. But again, I think it's also an issue where we're going to be right smack dab in the middle, both for the physical infrastructure side, like we started talking about here with the expansion of data centers and some of that stuff, but also sort of I think we are gonna experience some of those changes right, that are going
Yeah.
on in the larger urban centers, even if it's at a smaller dynamic, right? So
Yeah.
again, this is probably an issue we can do it. Spend a lot of time just sort of following up on, right?
It's very exciting. I'm grateful that there's a pocket in this country where you can go and it feels safe here. It does feel removed from all these experiments the rest of the planet is taken. And I do enjoy that we really do at the end of the day, when you get out from behind your laptop and out from behind your cell phone and you step out into the vast emptiness that is northern Nevada and the
Yeah.
beauty, it's so hard to get lost in the anxiety
Mhm.
about the future of this technology or any matter. And I love that about this culture. They're like, yeah, we can get bent out of shape about stuff, but then we go outside and we're fine again. Like
Right.
you take it back to a baseline. It's like we're all struggling human beings. It's been that way for thousands of years. This is a unique struggle, but it's a struggle
Yeah.
nonetheless. Yeah.
Yeah, that's probably a good way to describe it. So,
Yeah.
um, feel free to reach out to us if you have any comments on this. You can go to our website and shoot us an email at info@775alive.com, or visit one of our social media platforms, and we'd love to hear from you. I'm Scott Gavorski.
I'm Crystal Newton. Thank you so much for listening.
Yep, and we'll see you around the 775.